This program is presented by the Fromm Institute for Lifelong Learning at the University of San Francisco. The Fromm Institute, keeping up with the times no matter when.
So here we are, Brahms, week 3. Now the story so far, as you'll remember, we have him out of Hamburg as the young man and meeting Robert and Clara Schumann, together with Joseph Joachim, the great violinist. His career getting bootstrapped basically by Robert Schumann's enthusiasms for his work. And then the catastrophe following the Schumann household, as Robert began suffering all of the signs of an incipient mental collapse. Robert was unfortunately hospitalized at his own request in 1954, and for 2 years, Robert lingered on in the asylum in Indonesia. We don't know what killed him. We don't know what he died from exactly. Maybe mercury poisoning. It might have been syphilis, but we know that he died. And if we know that much, that he did. But he died in 1856. Now, all this time, Brahms, who was a very, very young man, remember, he was just 20 years old when he met the Schumanns for the first time. Very young man, was acting to sort of take care of the house and watch after things, because Clara had to reboot her touring career to get money back into the house during this time. And also, I think because she needed something to get her mind off of what was going on. Just to remind you that the asylum in Indonesia had forbidden her to go see Robert because Clara's visits agitated him so much. So the person who went to see Robert was Brahms, and he was acting as the go-between. Now, to get into the soap opera aspects of this story, all this time, Brahms, young man, passionate man, very, very, very high libido and all of that, he fell madly in love with Clara Schumann. Now, it's an interesting thought because Clara was quite a bit older than he was, quite a bit. She was not quite a generation, but almost. And he was, of course, very young. He was very young and athletic. He was very active. And Clara was not. Clara was a bit of a melancholic who sort of stayed to herself. And so she was having, while all this was going on, because she was very attracted to him too, and falling right in love with him herself, this godlike young man, this beautiful young man. But she was having to deal with a lot of things. For example, she had to feign an interest in toy soldiers because Brahms was so into them. He loved to play with this. Yeah, he loved to play with toy soldiers. Again, he was very young. He was 20 when they first met, and he was 20 going on 12, emotionally. Also, Brahms liked to get out and go for walks and go traipsing around hither and yon and so on. And Clara, bless her heart, was really accident prone. And so they'd be going out like for some walk out into the woods, and then she'd trip over a tree root and fall splat down, and then it'd have to take her to the doctor and all of that. And he's a young man who loves to go bounding all around and climbing the rocks and swimming and I can see her out there in her full skirt and her dress and her hat and all that, kind of wobbling along behind him and trying very gamely to be the older woman hanging on with this bounding, enthusiastic young man. It must have been a little tough for her. And so on, to say the least. But the fact is, she was very deeply in love with him as well. Probably very flattered, too, I should think, by this. So, Robert died, and then everything could change. And of course, the great soap opera question is, will they or won't they? Now, nobody knows for certain about whether or not this relationship was ever, as they say in the literature, consummated or not. We just don't know. What we do know, though, is that they had to figure out what to do with it. Well, they took a trip. They took a trip to Gerson, Lake Lucerne. Now, to make sure everything was above board, they had chaperones, they had two of the Schumann's sons, and they had Johannes' sister Elise. This was the only trip Elise ever took in her whole life. She was a homebody, very much so. We don't know the details because a lot of these letters that were sent got destroyed, and they did this just talking together. But they decided, pretty much at Johannes' insistence, if we can read through the lines, that they would not become a couple, that they would go on their own ways. I think the age difference was a big issue. I mean, some of Clara's children were almost Brahms' age, right? So on. And they would be close friends and they would be colleagues, but they would not be a couple. So that doesn't solve the question of whether they consummated the relationship or not, but I think the answer is probably no. It's my own feeling. Now, some people have led this to think that Clara Schumann turned into a professional widow for the rest of her life, doing nothing but promoting Brahms's music and her late husband's. We happen to know that she had a very intense physical relationship with another composer, Leon Kirchner. So she was by no means through. And neither was Johannes, of which more later. This story does have a little bit of soap opera about it. Now, as I told you last week, after this time, Brahms needed to reboot his career, which had gotten this enormous beginning with Robert Schumann's championing, and then it stopped, right, as the illness proceeded. Now he had to get going again. All this time, by the way, in case you're wondering what he had been doing, was at first he was living in a little tiny apartment in Dusseldorf. And he was just taking on a few odd jobs here or there, taking a few piano students as he could. That's how he was keeping himself alive and paying the rent. By the time Schumann died, Johannes was living in the house with the Schumanns. He had his own room and so on. But the fact is, he had absolutely zero money to speak of. It never bothered him. Never bothered him at all. He was okay as long as he had enough to eat. He didn't really care where he was or where he lived. And he stayed that way for his whole life. Kind of cool. Now, Clara never remarried, however. She could have, but she didn't. She lived almost as long as he did, and Brahms remained a lifelong bachelor. Now, he had another opportunity to get married, and we're going to find out about that today. Soap opera. But they did remain very close colleagues and close friends. Now, it was not an easy relationship. Brahms was not an easy man to get along with. He was moody. He had a tendency to be callous to people. He didn't realize it, but he could be very, very rude to people without knowing that he was being, sort of like a kid, like a teenager can get. And Clara was given to fits of melancholy and upset and hysteria and so on. So the fact of the matter is that both of them were difficult people. They went through periods of very bad arguments, and they wouldn't speak to each other for time or write, and then they'd make up. But one thing never changed, ever, and that was Clara's dedication to Brahms as a composer. She was one of the greatest pianists of the 19th century. I think Liszt and Clara Schumann are the two top, and she was his bulldog. She always saw to it that she promoted his music, and who better to promote it but this brilliant, fiery, wonderful pianist that she was. Clara was the very only second pianist ever to play Brahms's big piano work of this era. The work was a set of variations on a very little tiny tune by Handel, a little aria he had written. It was a set of titanic variations, capped off by a gargantuan fugue that he wrote as part of this rebooting of his career. He wrote it for his concert tours. Now, he didn't want to really play very much. He wasn't really a very enthusiastic public performer, but he knew he had to do it. So although he gave the premiere of the Handel variations, Clara played the second performance. And Clara was identified with this work throughout her entire life. Opus 24. Opus 24, he wrote this about 1858 or so he was 25 years old when he wrote this. Now, something to think about. This has been called the greatest set of variations since Beethoven's Diabelli variations, and he did it at age 25. So we're going to hear some of it. And for those of you who were with me 3 weeks ago, I guess it was, when I played a faculty recital at the conservatory for our donors, this was my second half. This particular piece has been part of my life for many, many years. I love it very dearly. And so I'm going to be enough of an egotist here to use the video of my performance. So you get to see me catch my glasses in midair as they almost fell off during the fugue. Now, the variations in fugue, the variations themselves are based on this dippy little tune. A very nice little tune, but very simple. And like most of these tunes, it's two parts, one part, two part, and each part is repeated. So part one, part two, part two. But at the end, Brahms caps it all by writing this gigantic fugue. He derives this fugue subject from the main melody. The main melody goes yam bi ba da ba da ba ba bum bum bi bum ba da ba da ba bum, like this. His fugue subject is ya da da dee ya da da dee ya da ba ba da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba ba bum, like that. Marvelous thing. Let me tell you a little bit about fugues and such and how all of this works, okay? Brahms is the only late 19th century composer to have a great interest in counterpoint and polyphony. It was considered pretty much a dead art by then. Old, musty museum art that people did when they were writing fugues and church music and stuff that Bach did, and all those old Palestrina. But the modern avant-gardists would never do it. You don't listen to Liszt for fugues. You don't go to Wagner operas to hear how well they did counterpoint. But he was fascinated in it, very much so, because it's a great noble art, So he and Joachim decided to start a little project, actually, to improve their knowledge of counterpoint as composers. So they began doing exercises in counterpoint. They would finish them, they would send them to each other, and as a reward, if they did really well, they would send each other books. That was really cool. It's all Skinnerian psychology, right? All reinforcement. Joachim got kind of bored with it before too long and stopped, but Johannes kept sending Joachim fugues. And so Joachim had to send him books back. And that was a really great way for Brahms to build up his library. Brahms was a big literary nut. He loved poetry, literature, all of that. Now, as a result, Brahms is the only ranking late 19th century composer who was a master of counterpoint, like Bach was, like Mozart could, like Handel could. Arthur. What is counterpoint? Thank you. I want to clarify. Counterpoint is polyphony, which means writing music from multiple lines, melodic lines simultaneously. So instead of melody with chords, which is the way we usually hear things, it's creating music where all the melodic lines are of equal value and moving along together. Okay? Thank you for asking, because I was assuming you all knew, and of course you don't. Now, just how far Brahms had gone can be seen in the fugue that ends the variations here, because this is an absolutely masterful fugue. It could be late Beethoven, it could be Bach, it could be anyone like that, except that it's written in a full romantic idiom for the piano. So it's not a starchy Baroque fugue. It's the whole Megillah of all of that, including a big gigantic shower of octaves at the end and all that. You lose 10 pounds every time you play it. Or at least I do. So let me tell you how a fugue works. A fugue begins with an exposition. Now, we state the fugue subject. That's a single voice does that, one of the voices. That's usually 4 melodic lines. The subject is a little melody of some sort, usually very short. It states it. After it finishes stating it, another voice comes in with what we call the answer. It's the fugue subject again on a different scale degree. So, for example, if it begins ya-da-da-dee, ya-da-da-dee, the answer might be ya-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da. It'll be different, but it's that. Then another voice comes in with the subject, la-dee-da-dee, da-dee-da-dee, and then finally another with the answer, la-dee-da-dee, la-da-da-da. Most fugues are 4 voices. There are some for 3, there's some for 6. Now, what's interesting, though, that's not all that's happening. Because once a voice finishes with its subject, it just keeps going with other material. So what happens is that as the exposition proceeds, it gets denser and more complex. More and more is going on. Sooner or later, the exposition ends, and then we move into the body of the fugue proper. Fugues do not have forms. They kind of had road maps. And the road map of a fugue is very simple. Subject entries followed by episodes connecting the subject entries. So you think of the subject entries as like pillars, and then between that, this going on between, and then you get to another subject entry, and it's like this, and then you go on for a while like that, and then you get to another subject entry like that. So it goes back and forth between episodic material, which is not subject, and subject. So the basic roadmap of a fugue, could look something like this. Our exposition, where everybody gets going, and then throughout the whole thing, from time to time, you hear subjects and answers. They come in and they provide a place for you to go. This is just hypothetical here. All fugues have their own sort of layout and so on, but everything in there that doesn't say subject or answer is all episodic. It's all episodic. So this is your average fugue. It's a very durable form, obviously, because you can dress it up or down. You can have things with just a few subject entries or things with a whole lot. This is a fugue with a whole lot. It's so good, in fact, that Brahms even knew some grand old tricks that the old masters knew. Like one of them is called augmentation. Wow. What it is you double all your note values of the subject. So instead of going ya-dee-dee-dee, ya-da-da-da, it goes do-dee-don-dee, la-dee-da-dee, like that. And that all works with everything else. The trick is to make all this work so it just doesn't sound like chaos. And that's what Brahms does. He knew what he was doing. It's like Bach did and so on. This is a great art. And I think a lot of 19th century composers didn't want to do it because it gave them great big huge headaches. As it does today, by the way. This is one of the toughest topics we teach in a conservatory theory program, is counterpoint. It's a toughie. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play the last group of variations. Okay, there's a whole bunch of them, and that's too long to play the whole thing. The last group of variations that start out fairly mild and then build up and build up and build up and build up, and then we'll hear the fugue. And I'll tell you in advance, I was having a little trouble with my glasses. They kept slipping off. And so right at the end of the fugue, I actually had to reach out and catch them. Before they fell off my head altogether, actually. So it was kind of fun. I realized I should have gotten something tight in my glasses or something because they kept doing this. And it was just a bit of a challenge. So very recent, this is a video. It's a static video. They just set the camera running, so there's no fancy camera work at all. Here we go. Variation. Variation. in a minor key, so they're atmospheric. Variation almost sounds like a little toy box going. Here we go. Begin a build up. This next variation, not too fast, but more aggressive. Faster. Last variation. Fugue. Here we go. Subject. Answer. Subject. Answer. And off we go. Subject. Episode. Thank you. Fun piece, n'est-ce pas? Yes, fun piece. Yeah, yeah. Boy, that's a recital piece and then some. It's one of the great ones. One of really, really, really great ones. It went pretty well, all things considered. Live concerts. You make boo-boos, you rush a little bit. It always happens, but still. Good, thank you. Good catch of the glasses. Yes, I know. I said I should have been wearing my reading glasses. They hang on a lot better. These things are slippy, but oh well, there we are. So, Brahms was doing quite well, and at one point, Clara had sent him one of her students. It was a young lady who was the sister of one of the high officials at a very small court up there in Lippe-Detmold, and he got an appointment as a Kapellmeister. It's the only time he ever held a court position in his life. For 3 years, from October through December, he was the conductor and composer in residence in Detmold. It was a great gig for him because what it was is it didn't ask him to do very much. He didn't have to work too hard, but it was a pretty good pay. And as a matter of fact, the money supported him for the rest of the year. So he kept it for 3 years. This is the period in which he wrote those serenades for orchestra. I played one of them for you last year. He enjoyed it a great deal, although being Brahms, he griped about it being out in the middle of nowhere. But that's just him. So when he wasn't there, he was in Hamburg with his family, very, very nice so, or he was in Göttingen with a young conductor named Otto Grimm, with whom he became very friendly, and Grimm became another one of his bulldogs, another one of these people, or in Hanover, of course, with Joachim, his good friend. So he had things pretty well worked out at this point. He had, for a young man in his late 20s, boy, he was doing really well. Up to about 1860, everything was good. He was doing a beautiful job with his career. Everything was going well. And it stayed that way, by the way. And there came this moment, which is probably his nadir in human relations. He met, through the Grimms, a young woman named Agatha von Sebold, and very fine young woman. She very intelligent, very cultivated, musical, gorgeous voice, beautiful soprano. And he just fell head over heels in love with her. That didn't sit too well with Clara, by the way. She had been out for a visit at one point, and she saw him sort of hugging and kissing this young lady, and Clara packed her bags up and went right back to Dusseldorf, even though Clara had been bugging him to find a young wife. When he really did, she didn't like it at all. He proposed, and she accepted, and he gave her an engagement ring. And then probably what is the absolute worst moment in his life, I think, he sent her a letter sometime later, a sort of, ha-ha, sorry about that old chap, ha-ha-ha-ha, not a good idea, changed my mind sort of letter. Crushing to her, as you can imagine. I mean, it was terrible. And rather flippant and inconsiderate, from what we can tell. Again, she burned it. And so on. She was crushed. She eventually forgave him. And many, many years later, she wound up, marrying and doing fine with her life. Many, many years later, she wrote a very short book about her life. And she talked about the affair with Brahms. And apparently that had been the high point of her romantic life, no matter what. A lot of people were upset with him. The Grimms were furious with him about that. And as a matter of fact, they didn't speak to him for years afterwards. It was healed. It was healed because Grimm wound up being one of his great bulldogs, but still. So in other words, it's a rather sorry moment. There they are, okay? So, yeah, there she is. She doesn't look too happy in that picture, And he looks kind of abashed, as well he should. You heel, which is what he really was. So he probably just ran. I think he looked at his career and said, I just can't do this. I'm too young. I don't have enough money, and I just can't. I think he panicked. He was a bit of a Peter Pan in so many ways. And so he just couldn't do it, and so off he went. So fortunately, he never did anything this callous again. He came very close a couple of times, but never. But some of the music of this era that he wrote reflects the feelings of his heart. And these art songs that he wrote, were written very, very much under the influence of him being so deeply in love with Agatha. This is love music. These are love songs. So these 8 songs and romances in this piece called A Sonnet, a sonnet, sung by Fischer Dieskau in one of his slightly hammier moments, I must tell you. He can go a little over the top, once in a while for such, and he does, but it's okay. He sings it very well, and Barenboim does his usual perfect performance on the piano with that. Gorgeous, beautiful piece of music. Love song to Agatha.
Ach, könnte vergessen Sie Ihr schönes, liebliches Wesen, den Blick, die freundliche Liebe, die vielleicht ich möchte genießen. Doch mein Herz kann es nie, und doch ist Wahnsinn zu hoffen Sie. Und sie schweben, gibt Mut und Leben zu weichen nie. Liebliches Wesen, den Blick, die freundliche Liebe, die viel Liebe nimmer gelesen.
Wow. Talk about a way to woo women, huh? To write something like that, so wonderful. Not bad at all. Not bad at all. Despite the way he treated her. So, 1859, he got a pretty cool job. He began conducting the Hamburg Women's Choir, Hamburg Frauenchor, which was an amateur group, and that really helped him to learn his skills as a choral conductor, which was one of his major activities through his life. Also, it gave him no end of women falling in love with him. He had a number of issues there that I don't think he ever did anything about any of this, but I know we had a couple of very smitten ladies. Who wouldn't be, right? They had their beautiful, godlike young choral conductor, and there they all were. Fortunately for them, he was very temperamental. He had a tendency to have temper tantrums and all of that, but they loved him anyway for all of that. One of the coolest things is that he wrote music for them. And of course, if you got a choral conductor writing music for your choir, that's cool. But what if he's Brahms? Oh, wow. Oh, wow. So he wrote this for them. Okay? This is as wonderful a piece as he ever wrote in his life, in my opinion. It is absolutely glorious in his writing, and it's a combination that you don't hear too often with him, because he uses the harp. So yeah, it's really quite wonderful. It's for female chorus, harp, and two horns. And what a wonderful, wonderful sound. He's setting a contemporary poet, Ruperti, and the very first performance is that both Clara Schumann and Joachim came to Hamburg to do a big concert to help him along. So that's kind of like them going to, Poughkeepsie or something like that, And so they went and they did this concert where his women's chorus sang his new pieces and they played. And as Clara wrote that evening in her diary, she said, "They are pearls. How can one help loving such a man?" Oh. Imagine being in a choir and getting somebody writing something like this for you. I know, Brahms. We don't usually think of him as being that sweet and tender like that, but of course he could be, very much so. And as a choral composer, he's really one of the best of all time. Really, 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 really was. Well, all this time, you kind of wonder, why wasn't he in Vienna? That's where he should have been. I mean, this was the center of musical life again. It had been Leipzig for a while in the 19th century, but now it was back. And he wound up going on just a visit, a short visit, finally. He had always wanted to go. And of course, he was completely captivated by the city. Any hard feelings that the Viennese had had towards him because of Robert Schumann's somewhat slightly questionable remarks about Viennese cultural institutions were long forgotten. He fell in love with it, and he wound up staying as a visitor for like 9 months. Finally, he went back to Hamburg very reluctantly to pick up his work again, and then he got an invitation. And the invitation was to conduct the Vienna Voice Academy, the Singing Academy. And that was a very good, very old choir that had fallen on hard times. They were either going to get a good new conductor or they were going to go out of business, but it was going to be one or the other. So the board decided, let's try to get this exciting young composer that everybody's talking about and so on, see if we can get him. Well, that's all he needed. And at that point, he became the son of Vienna that we think of him as. He moved to Vienna, and he remained there for the rest of his life. Now, his pattern became very clear. He spent the winter, the concert season in Vienna, and then during the summer, he would usually rent a small room somewhere out in the country where he could do a lot of his composing and so on. Brahms loved to be alone out in the country in little tiny places. He would go for long walks in the woods and enjoy himself. And in Vienna, he very quickly became a very familiar sight around town because one of his compositional techniques was to work it all out in his head while he was going on long walks or sitting at a bench in the Prater looking out. And so even from a very young age, he's not quite yet 30 at this point, he still became a very familiar sight in Vienna. And of course, eventually he became almost as much as one of the buildings. He became such a part of it. So the Sing Academy, well, what they weren't quite ready for was that they were getting this young conductor full of skill, really, really good with choirs, but also in love with very difficult and very older music. And the Viennese particular audience were not really ready for somebody this heavy duty. They wanted somebody to do nice little cute little choral concerts, and instead they're getting this man giving them cantatas, Bach cantatas, Handel cantatas, Schütz from the early Baroque, Gabrieli, Renaissance masters like Rovetti. His first season, he had them learn and perform part of the Bach Christmas oratorio. And this was a really tough sell for the Viennese, that I'll be sitting there kind of going, boy, this is awfully starchy music, isn't it? And it was he was criticized a lot for this, but he wasn't about to let them get him. It's like, next year, the B minor Mass, you wait. That's what he was. He was not about to back down. He never did. And he turned that into one of the great choruses in Europe. He did. During his first year, he did something even more special. He conducted a concert of his own music. Good for him. And among them was a set of pieces called the Marian Lieder, songs about, Mary and so on. And that really helped to establish his reputation. The fact is the Marian Lieder are music for everybody. They're fun to sing. They can be sung very well by an amateur choir. And they are just a joy to listen to. All of them. We're going to hear a few of them. The first is De Jager. Okay? De Jager. So here we go.
Ist
Can we say Christmas music, folks? Uh-huh, uh-huh. Here we go. Here's another one, Madeline. More solemn, right? Lovely stuff. And one more, Marius Lob. You really want to sing them, you know, they're so much fun. Good stuff. Beautiful stuff. A little bit depressing lyric there at the end, but hey. Let's take our break while that lovely choral music's in our head. Let's take our little break. So please be back at 5 after, if you could. Thank you. I left you at that wonderful concert with the Sing Academy, with Clara Schumann and with Joachim. Well, he had another guest as well, and his guest was the absolutely barn-busting great pianist Karl Tausig, who died young. He was a student of Liszt. Magnificent pianist. Well, he and Brahms on that concert joined together and played a 2-piano piece. This was a sonata for 2 pianos that he had written. Now, we hardly ever hear it in this, guys, because Brahms decided to recast it. And eventually he recast it as a work for piano and string quartet. It's the piano quintet in F minor. And it's one of the great, great, great chamber works of them all. But it's also very effective as a 2-piano piece. Here is the scherzo movement. That's the 3rd movement of this. In the guys, you almost never hear it as a 2-piano work. I'm not going to do anything but just pictures with this, and because I think you'll see why I chose it as the piece progresses, I have chosen Turners for this. I think they work very well. So here we go. Not all Turners, or few, some other painters. So, in case you're wondering. back to the original part, the first part 1, and we do it again, more or less. How's that for a barn burner? Yeah. Whoa. I'd love to get with a psychiatrist someday and have them tell me why a piece of music like that would evoke all that oceanic imagery for me. You know, it was when I select pictures for my pieces, I just literally go with my subconscious, and it says, Scott, you need to do pictures of bunny rabbits for this. And so I go find bunny rabbits, you know. And so I went and found naval warfare and Turners and storms and fire for that. The fire and storm is easy, but why and the water? Well, anyway. I don't think I want to know, actually, to tell you the truth. That must have been quite a concert. Karl Tausig, Clara Schumann, Joachim Brahms, the Sing Academy. Woo! Too bad we all missed it, huh? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something. Right around the time he was meeting all these people in Vienna, he actually met this man, Turgenev. And the two of them talked very, very, very seriously about writing an opera together. It's one of those sad things of history that they didn't do it. Think about a Brahms Turgenev opera. Well, that would have been very serious, wouldn't it? My goodness. So on. But nothing came of it. But this rather gives the lie to an old canard about Brahms. And the canard was that he was far too serious and far too upstanding a composer ever to get involved in something as hurly-burly as opera. In fact, he wanted to write one. He just never found the right property. It's too bad. There's a cantata, I don't think I'm going to have a chance to get to it in this class, called Rinaldo, not heard very often. Gives us a little sense of what he might have been like as an opera composer, and the answer is damn good. Although kind of starchy, but it would have been good. You know, I would like to have seen him write an opera about, I don't know, like, you know, St. Francis of Assisi or something, you know, something like that. You know, would have been very, very good, I think, but instead he didn't. Well, there it is. But what we have, marvelous, right? Marvelous. Well, Brahms may have had a troubled love life, but Joachim at least got some of his priorities together, and Joachim got married to a lovely woman named Amalie Schneeweiss, and so she became Amalie Joachim, and they had a son in 1864. To mark the occasion, what a wonderful friend Brahms was. He wrote a lullaby for the new baby. Oh. Now, it's called, of course, the Sacred Lullaby. It wasn't published for a very long time, as you can see. Opus 91 is late, and so it wasn't published until then. But this is as soft and wonderful as it gets. You know, you can often describe Brahms as a cream puff, as all starchy and stiff on the outside, just soft and sweet as he could be on the inside, and he was. This is a man who could burst into tears if presented with a kitten, you know. So this piece is that absolute sweet, gushy interior of his, together with all of the beautiful, the skill, and all of the reserve. Like many violinists, Joachim played the viola, and so he wrote this for Joachim. Now, I have a little bit of soap opera here to add, though. It's always some, right? What happened was that eventually Joachim, he was a very paranoid man, and he was convinced that Amalie was having an affair with a publisher. She wasn't, but he was all convinced. And Brahms tried to ease things. He wrote a piece called Stilled Longing. It's another song that was published as Opus 91 as an offering that he hoped would bring peace. Well, it didn't. And in the divorce proceedings, Brahms testified on Amalie's behalf, not Joachim's. And Joachim really never forgave him. It didn't completely destroy their relationship, but it came really, really close. The best thing for Brahms to have done was just to bow out of it entirely, but he just didn't have the sense to do that. Even in his old age, he was still basically a teenager mentally. So, however, back in the day when the son was born, this piece. Like many violinists, Joachim loved to play the viola. And so Brahms set this for alto voice, viola, and piano. How he cared for this man. He was his soulmate. He was the person he could talk literature all night with. He was dear, close friend. And neither one of them had very many. So you can hear that in this absolutely wonderful piece. I played this many, many years ago, I remember, with a symphony violist. And we just always, when we got to the concert, we're going to say, oh, here goes. We get to play this, you know. Oh, it's so wonderful. Here we go with the Sacred Lullaby, Opus 91, but it comes right from this time. This is Jesse Norman, the glorious Jesse Norman, with Baron Boehm on the piano and a very, very fine violist Wolfgang Christ. Marvelous. Here we go.
Die Schwebe
Birthday present. Birthday present. They were coming fast. The pieces, mature Brahms was right on its way, coming fast. Brahms, the great chamber music composer of the late 19th century, was just about to make his appearance. He hadn't yet. But the great writer of string quartets, piano trios, chamber wind ensembles, and so on, right around the corner and right around this time, he produced his first piano quartet. That's for string trio and piano. It's actually not his first one, because he'd written an earlier one, but he abandoned it and eventually rewrote it, and it became his second piano quartet. So this one is officially the first one. Great big piece. Fabulous thing. But we all know it best. We know best mostly because of its big last movement. He wrote it in Detmold, probably. He polished it in Hamburg in 1961, and then it started getting played in Vienna. Both Clara and Joachim thought it was a little unruly. They thought it was a little wild. They thought it was a little much. Shows you what they knew. And the fact is, I think it's just that wildness why everybody loves it so much now. It's probably his favorite chamber work, and that's probably because the last movement, the Gypsy Rondo that finishes it up. It's like one of those Hungarian rhapsodies that he was starting to write, those great big Hungarian dances. It's a great big rondo with 3 episodes, but it just moves like a freight train. It's marvelous. Here's how it works. You have a bunch of reprises, but see how he keeps them far apart from each other? That way you don't get bored. You know, you don't get bored thinking, oh, here comes the reprise again. You know, doesn't happen. Then you have these wonderful episodes. There's all kinds of episodes. They fly all over the place, really, quite cool. And then you have all these repeats of the episodes, even cooler yet. And then you get a great big cadenza, believe it or not, for the piano, and it's hard. I've played it. Oy, yay, yay. So on. And then you have a couple of great big transitions. And what I will also tell you to be ready for that last reprise when you get to it, basically what it says in the music is, floor it, baby. Here we go. down for a minute, and then they get ready. The big gypsy dance. Gypsy love. Red checkered tablecloths, candles. Back to fun. Cadenza! Ready? Fasten your seatbelt. You wait for it. Almost needs a drum roll in the background, doesn't it? All right. Oh, if there's, violin rosin clouds all over the place. So what he needed at this point, he was a brilliant local musician, all the rage of Vienna, but he needed that breakthrough to becoming world famous. It was right around the corner. It was just about to happen. And that, of course, will be the topic of our next class. All right, thank you.